Thank you so much. Thank you so much for those kind words. I bring you much love from New York City. So fantastic to be here in Sydney, Australia. I've never been to Australia before, and it's just, I heard so much about the Australian people, how good looking the Australian people were, and I wasn't prepared for the reality of it, how really good looking you are. And this room is certainly an affirmation of that. We have quite a good looking crew here in this room, do we not? I guess an attestation to the magic of Vegemite, as it were. So I left my speaking notes on top of the bridge climb. So I will try to muscle through as we go. And I'm going to keep it light. I want to try to keep everybody awake during this last segment. I know you can see the home stretch and see the door open, and you can get out and have yourself maybe a libation at the local pub. But let's talk about the good old days when piracy was simple. Back in the last century and the early part of this century, theatrical movies were distributed via reel-to-reel. The reels were simply shipped to the movie theaters. It was a total analog system, and it stayed in place through the early part of the 2000 decade. And the way that people had to steal the movies, if they were so inclined, was to actually go into the theater, basically put up a tripod during an afternoon showing, film the movie, and then take it and make DVDs out of it and sell those DVDs at street fairs and flea markets and diners. Do you have flea markets here in Australia? You know what that is? Okay. Subsequently, the movie studios began to digitize the movies and distribute them via satellite and via hard copy. But by digitizing them that way, they made it much easier to steal and be able to digitally produce pirated copies and distributed high-quality copies online, so exacerbating the problem. Sometimes the old school is the better school. An interesting thing happened a couple of years ago, one of a seminal event. Sony was putting out a comedy movie starring Seth Rogen called The Interview, which the premise and the plot had to do with assassinating the sitting dictator of North Korea. Now, the sitting dictator of North Korea did not find the movie terribly amusing. Maybe he wasn't a particularly big Seth Rogen fan. So he put out word that if this movie was released theatrically, he would very possibly look to kill the actors and blow up movie theaters in the United States where it was going to be initially released. Now, the US movie-going public, although they may like Seth Rogen and may want to see the comedy, they weren't really willing to risk their lives to see Seth Rogen. So Sony, which also ended up being the subject of a cyber attack by North Korea in relation to this movie, decided that in order to try to offset this, that they would release the movie online and in limited theaters. And why this was significant, because this was the first time that a major studio had released a major first-run theatrical motion picture online. Really the wave of the future, the wave of things to come. And what is the scope of the online piracy, the international online piracy? Well, if you ask the Motion Picture Association of America, a trade group which has a vested interest, they will tell you that the loss in stolen video content of the studios and the makers of such content is in the billions of dollars in terms of lost revenue. Now that's hard to prove or disprove, because just because somebody's stealing something doesn't mean they were going to buy it in the first place. So it's not necessarily totally lost revenue. But suffice it to say, it's a major problem. And you might think that probably the biggest place of online piracy is China, and certainly they're a significant player. But ironically, you probably wouldn't guess that Sweden is a major place for online piracy. There is a peer-to-peer entity there called Pirate Bay. which was a notorious online piracy peer-to-peer site. People could go to steal online content. Now, when we look at proposed legislative solutions to the problem, in 1998, the US Congress passed the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. Now, what that act did is that it provided a safe harbor for websites and internet service providers who might have been putting up unauthorized, stolen copyrighted material, whereby if the copyright owner notified the website or the internet service provider that there was illegal content up there, their content that they owned, and the website and or the service provider quickly agreed to take down that content, there was no harm, no foul. And initially it started out where each time an illicit clip would appear on a website, on Facebook, whatever, the copyright owner, the Hollywood studios or whatever, would have to actually call and ask that that specific clip be taken down. Now, over time, software has emerged to address that, where, for instance, YouTube has a software called Content ID, where all of the copyrighted content is registered. So as soon as something that does not fall within that copyrighted content or falls within that content coming from a third party, it's automatically taken down. YouTube takes down millions of unauthorized video clips per day, and it's all very much automated. One of the shortfalls of that system, though, is when an actual copyright owner licenses the content to a third party and doesn't bother to tell YouTube that they've licensed it to a third party and have it therefore whitelisted, the third party who has the rightful rights to show that content can have their content taken down off YouTube. Also, Facebook Live has a rights management system whereby rights holders can notify Facebook of their live content that's being streamed, and Facebook will take it down if there's unauthorized content put up on Facebook Live. Now, Facebook, in its infinite wisdom to try to take over the world, does this in a way that the rights owners have to come to Facebook. They have to deal with Facebook in order to get their content protected. So, an imperfect system, as it were. In 2011, the United States Congress proposed the Stop Online Piracy Act. Now, this put the onus to take down the offending video content on the actual websites and internet service providers. And it became a major fight in the United States, pitting the entertainment community in Hollywood against the technology community up in Silicon Valley. And the content owners in Hollywood were looking to protect their content, whereas the technologists such as Facebook and Amazon and Google were crying freedom of speech. They didn't want this onus placed on them for obvious reasons. And it really wasn't so much a matter of freedom of speech. I think it was more of a matter of Silicon Valley looking for freedom to make money. And the proposed legislation, it blew up in a very short period of time. So the lone remaining legislative protection in the United States remains the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. Now, a couple of years ago, there was a major, I think it was a middleweight fight between Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao. And it was a pay-per-view fight. I think it was actually in Las Vegas, but it was seen worldwide. And it was projected that the fight would generate many, many millions of dollars in pay-per-view revenues. And it did. But when the final revenue tallies came in, they were less than what the promoters of the fight had hoped for. And what they found out was that people had been, quote unquote, periscoping the fight. Now, Periscope was a brand new product at that time. It's owned by Twitter, where people could live stream video and content.